Hello, this is Anita Delahaye, Head of Learning Science for Argos Education. I'm going to do a demo of the authoring capabilities in the Argos platform, focusing on the ease with which authors can create different types of learning experiences and even include external resources in their own designs. Just a few notes before I get started. First of all, we have both individual educators and learning experience designers who are working in the platform today. And the platform enables collaborative authoring so that as an author on a project, I can invite other authors to work on that project with me. They can be authors at my institution. They can be authors at other institutions. There's really no bounds on that. So what you're looking at here, we call core authoring, and it's really built in such a way that it's very easy to work with. Every title is editable. There's a view history here so that if I make an error or one of my co-authors makes an error, we can see that history and we can roll back. And every page allows you to attach learning objectives to that page. So I have pre-authored several learning objectives for this project, and I can add them here. I can later go back and add more. I can reword. I can split learning objectives if I determine that the grain size is too large for me to be able to effectively measure. And those changes will propagate down to where these learning objectives are used. And any of the sections allows for sort of easy styling and WYSIWYG controls. So here I've started with an image. This is a content section, but if I wanted to apply one or more different types of styles to that, I could add those boxes. In addition, it's very easy to add alt text and captions, two very good practices for accessibility. If I decided that I wanted to add additional text or a table or any other kind of feature, even a problem before this image, I just click above the image and those options become available to me. So I'll demonstrate adding a paragraph, but I could add one of multiple types of activities. And we'll look at some of these in greater detail, as well as show some other types of activities such as simulations and branching that are available. But for now, I'm just going to add a paragraph type here. If I wanted to add, media or other styling features, I could do that quite easily. So as I scroll down, you can see that there is informational text here that's been styled already. And I come to the first multiple choice question that has been inserted. This question, again, can map to one or more learning objectives. And so I add those here so that the system can begin to put together a learning estimate for each individual student and also for the entire cohort as to whether they are making progress toward these learning objectives. And so normally you would have multiple questions for each learning objective so that you can begin to track that. You'll see here that I have the question stem and the answer choices. I'm also able to create targeted feedback for both the correct and the incorrect responses. And then last but not least, I can add hints. If I really think the student is going to be stuck and they're going to need a little help to know how to think about the question or how to derive the answer, I can add hints here. Here's another multiple choice question. I also want to point out this single response type of question. Here, students are asked a question and they're asked to do a little bit of writing about that question. I can create feedback for answers that is sort of a submit and compare. I ask the student to craft a response and then I show them the correct answer or an expert generated response. I also have the opportunity to apply manual grading, instructor grading to that item. In that case, the student crafts a response and that gets submitted to the instructor panel, and the instructor grades that item as they would any other item in their LMS. And those grades will return to the LMS if the instructor happens to be using one as well. All right, so from there, I wanted to show a nice feature that we've put in place for authors to begin to see the quality of their design in terms of certain best practices or learning, theory, learning science, and, allow them to sort of see where some challenges might be and to easily fix those. So I'm going to go ahead and run the review. Right now, we have something that checks the accessibility of each part of the design, as well as something called a pedagogy checker. So I'll speak briefly to each of these, as well as mention that there are other types of analysis of a design that are possible. So there is a lot of interest in creating equity reviews of the materials, and those types of additional analyses can be added, and each of these categories can be further built out to include additional things that it's looking for. So a very simple one here for accessibility. The system found 7 accessibility errors, all missing alt text on the page. I can either go right to that particular spot in the course and fix that on the fly, or I can say this one doesn't, for whatever reason, doesn't need that particular treatment. And you'll see that increments down to 6, and I've dealt with that. And I can run this review as often as I'd like. So as I continue to improve the design, I can see how my improvements are going. In terms of pedagogy, it's identified that several learning objectives don't yet have activities related to them. And I think it's also identified that several objectives are not tied to activities. And so it's really looking for that alignment piece. Okay, so at this point, I am going to switch to adaptive authoring. This is a lesson designed by one of our publishing partners, InSpark. It's set up to have the feel of a simulation. It's problem-based immersive learning, and usually covers 1 or 2 or 3 key concepts related to the course. So this particular lesson is dealing with an astrophysics topic. And I'm going to work a little bit through this lesson just to show you how the system performs. And then I'm going to flip over and show you how it's done in the authoring environment. So one of the things I want to point out is, like in the core authoring, here there is the opportunity to create targeted feedback. So I've selected the wrong answer, and it is prompting me to consider why I might have selected that wrong answer, give me some new information, and encouraging me to try again. So I will do that. And that time I get it right, so I move forward. The next thing I want to point out is some basic branching that authors have the ability to include in their designs. So unbeknownst to me as the student, this particular multiple choice question is going to route me to different pathways depending on the answer I choose. So the purpose of this assignment is, of this problem, is really to help me select a testable hypothesis to begin to think like a scientist. So I'm going to select this one here. And first, you'll notice that it's captured my answer and it's brought that forward. So I can always refer back to that. And next, it's going to ask me to do a plausibility check. Is this a good hypothesis? Is it a testable hypothesis? And so this particular next question that I get relates to the hypothesis that I chose. And it will either verify that it is a testable hypothesis. I happen to pick well that time. If it wasn't a testable hypothesis, if I picked the wrong multiple choice question, then it would change the way that I work through that problem. So it would sort of lead me to the conclusion that that wasn't a testable hypothesis, and then actually send me back to that initial screen where I can try another answer choice and see what happens. So here I move forward. So to look at this in the authoring environment, I am pulling up the rules-based editor. You'll see here this page that has those 5 answer choices on it, and you'll see how the page deals with what I do there. So if I selected hypothesis number 1, it navigates me to reality check hypothesis 1 page. 2, I go to a different page, and 3 to 5, I go to yet another page. These rules can be set up here. We've assigned each of these answer choices a number, but it can be a text string, an array, a Boolean, a math expression, and so forth. And that unlocks different options for me here in terms of setting what those are. And then there's almost always a default wrong choice. So if I'm not selecting or I get the answer wrong. So up here, you can see that those pages are authored, and ultimately everybody is brought back to this experiment page with the ability to display the hypothesis that was selected by that student. I'm going to show another capability that this adaptive author has. So what you'll notice right away is that this particular simulation, also developed by InSpark, includes a resource from PhET. PhET is an organization at University of Colorado Boulder, and they make these simulations available for instructors to include. And the really neat thing about this is the authoring platform is actually in dialogue with this particular simulation, so that it understands what the student is doing in the simulation and can target the feedback and sort of increment the score. And I didn't point that out, but the score will change here based upon how the student's doing. It can be designed however the author wishes to design, to both increment and decrement based upon their choices, or not, the student choices, or not at all. But let me show you how that works in the authoring. So I've come over to that screen in the authoring platform. I'm going to show you that it is the same simulation here, and that I can begin to work in that simulation. And what's happening here is in this adaptivity panel, you see that the feedback is being targeted to what the student does. So the system is measuring what the student ultimately does and can give feedback based on that. And the really neat thing to think about here is, educators, subject matter experts, after teaching these subjects, they really get a good sense of the typical errors that students tend to make. Looks like apparently one of the typical errors is creating an ion instead of an atom, creating 3 protons instead of 6 protons, and they can target the feedback individually to that particular misconception. So I'll pop this open and you can see that this particular feedback is authored to try to correct that particular misunderstanding that the student has. This can be quite rich. It can have audio, images, video, and even additional simulations in the feedback. So, this sort of, the system runs through these, all these potential possibilities when it gets data back from the simulation, and it addresses those. So the feedback, so the adaptivity that's available here is both in terms of, giving targeted feedback, as well as opportunities for branching and pathing based upon student answers. So before I leave you, I want to show just one more feature. So now we're moving into the ability to have ongoing maintenance for my learning project. And what this does is captures all of the data that has been accrued for any actual users, anybody using this particular project. A really neat thing about the platform is that I can make my project available to educators at lots of different types of institutions, and it maintains that linkage. One upside of this is that if I want to make a change or even a correction, if there's an error, I can push that out to anybody who has adopted this product, and they can choose to take it or not. Another really interesting feature that comes from that lineage is that that data is accrued across all of those instances. So what you begin to see here is really an analysis of how learners are performing against your design. You can look at activities, you can look at pages, you can look at objectives. And what you're seeing here is for each of those particular problems, you're getting some feedback on, first of all, the number of students who've attempted it. This is good to know in terms of both understanding who's accessing that particular activity on a page, as well as whether you have sort of a sufficient number to really get some meaning out of these particular numbers. The system assigns it a relative difficulty. A first try correct, how many students are getting this correct on the first attempt? And each of those activities, most of them allow students to continue to try until they get it correct. How many students are persisting until they get the correct answer? So we expect this number to be a lot higher. So these are just some preliminary metrics that the system exposes. This is an area where we'd like to do a lot more work and make this really robust so that ongoing maintenance and improvement can be done for any given project. All right, with that, I'm going to conclude the authoring demo. Thank you so much for watching.